Hey everybody, this is Manny Alicandro. Welcome to another episode of Manny's Take. I'm really excited about today's show. We have a tremendous guest, someone I've known for many years, probably the most famous political consultant in the history of politics in the United States, Roger Stone. Roger, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Manny. I always thought you would have made a great New York State Attorney General. And now when I watch the current New York State Attorney General, I'm even more certain than before.
Thank you. And that's how far back I know Roger, at least for a couple of years. And, I think it's important for Roger to get his story out. I'm sure all of my viewers have seen what's happened to him, read it in the media, and I think we need to support Roger, and we need as many people to support Roger as possible. And that's really why I wanted to give Roger another opportunity. I know he's done some media, but I wanted him to target some other people in my audience that follow me and follow the platforms that I'm on. And I really want us to come out and support Roger. So with that, Roger, let's dig in. So kind of where are you right now with your legal matter? My understanding is that the latest was that you were to report to federal prison by June 30th.
That is correct. I think it's important for your listeners to understand that for 16 months, I had been under what I consider to be a totally unconstitutional gag order. The judge in my case, who I think made a number of errors, which will be included in our appeal, I'm appealing not only my conviction, but I'm also separately appealing the judge's decision not to grant a new trial based on the egregious, blatant misconduct of the jury forewoman in my case, who, Manny, actually in 2019 attacked not only President Trump, but attacked me by name on her Twitter and Facebook feeds, beginning on the day that I was arrested, had those social media platforms on a private setting during jury selection and during my trial, and then deleted them after the trial to cover her tracks.
Wow.
But Judge Amy Berman Jackson ruled that that did not constitute evidence of bias, which is, of course, ridiculous. But that's why I'm really glad to have the opportunity to be with you today, because
Sure.
The coverage of my trial was so cursory. Most Americans don't even know what it is that I was charged with, have no idea how flimsy the charges against me are, how ridiculous this entire process has been in terms of my constitutional rights or my ability to defend myself. So it's great to have the opportunity. Basically, for over 16 months, the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post said, Roger Stone will be indicted for treason. Roger Stone will be indicted for conspiracy against the United States. Roger Stone will be indicted for mail fraud, wire fraud, cyber crimes, including receipt and dissemination of stolen material, cyber crimes, including unauthorized access to a protected computer, money laundering of millions of dollars of foreign campaign contributions in violation of the foreign contribution ban, aiding and abetting a felony, being an accessory to a felony after the fact. And all of these, of course, were illegally leaked by the Mueller Dirty Cop Brigade and immeditely posted by CNN and MSNBC.
And I'm sure you just recently saw, sorry to interrupt, that the White House Correspondents Association gave CNN a special award for the filming of the pre-dawn FBI raid. I mean, that's atrocious, horrible.
Well, particularly when you understand the truth, which is at the time that my arrest warrant was executed, a search warrant was also executed. As you know, Manny, as an attorney, the leaking of the execution of a search warrant is a felony.
Absolutely.
CNN would like us to believe that they were at my house 11 minutes before the FBI on the basis of a journalistic hunch. Journalistic hunch? My ass. Why won't the FBI release the email chain between CNN and the FBI in the days and weeks prior to my arrest? They're being sued for it because they won't turn it over under a Freedom of Information Act request. Better yet, why did CNN producer Sarah Murray contact my attorney and email him a draft of my indictment without any court markings or timestamp just minutes after I was arrested.
It was never filed in Pacer, right? So you never saw the index number on top of it, right?
But it did have the meta tags on it that showed the initials of its author, Andrew Weissman.
Wow.
Undisputed proof that CNN had advance notice, had a tip from the prosecutors about my arrest. So this idea that this was just good journalism is nonsense. And somebody committed a crime. Both the person who tipped them committed a crime, and a person who received the tip committed a crime. We'll probably get into this in civil litigation at some point, but let's just look at the raid itself. 29 SWAT-clad, assault weapon-bearing FBI agents arrived in 17 armored vehicles, helicopter overhead, a canine unit of the most vicious dogs you've ever seen on leashes. They bring a battering ram up to my front door. They have 2 amphibious units with frogmen on them in the backyard where my house is on a canal for the arrest of a 67-year-old with no prior criminal record who's charged with white-collar process crimes. It's an absurdity.
It's tragic.
The government says, well, we had to arrest Stone in this way because he was a flight risk. They're well aware of the fact that I don't own a passport at that time, have no valid passport, don't own a firearm, but more importantly, 3 hours later at arraignment, they don't ask for a cash bond for my release, proving that they never thought I was a flight risk whatsoever. Let's put it this way. The prosecutor in my case, Aaron Zielinski, is an unethical, corrupt scumbag, and there will be formal charges filed against him with DOJ and with the DC and Maryland bar. He defrauded the court. He illegally leaked. He suborned perjury at my trial. They defrauded the court on multiple motions. The dirty cops are far dirtier than even you can imagine. And the manner of my arrest cost the taxpayers $1.1 million. Wow. Terrified my wife, who still has nightmares about it. And the irony is, the special counsel's office spoke to my lawyers the day before. All they had to do was ask me to voluntarily surrender, and I could have saved the American people a huge amount of money, and I could have driven CNN's ratings even further down than they already are. But instead, we had to have this circus, the purpose of which was to taint the jury, the purpose of which was to paint me as some kind of bad guy when, you know, I'm a warm, lovable, fuzzy kind of guy.
Yeah, it's tragic. I can't believe that you're continuing to go through this. I know you filed a motion for retrial based upon the information that you received about the jury forewoman, and Judge Berman denied that. Berman Jackson denied that that motion. Correct?
That is correct. No lawyer, from Jonathan Turley to Andrew Napolitano to Alan Dershowitz, who has looked at her opinion, believes it was correctly decided. The U.S. Supreme Court's very strong on this. Every defendant is entitled to an impartial and indifferent jury. There was nothing indifferent about this juror. The juror said that all Donald Trump supporters are racist. When we raised that as demonstrable bias against me, since I'm a supporter of Trump, the judge actually said, if I may quote, well, there's no evidence that the juror knew prior to the trial that Roger Stone was a supporter of Donald Trump's. This is the same judge who said there was nothing phony about the Mueller investigation, said that in her diatribe against me at sentencing, and said, and I may quote, there'll be no investigation of the investigators in my court. In other words, I was specifically prohibited at trial from raising the misconduct of the special counsel, the FBI, the Department of Justice, or any member of Congress. But we've seen the egregious misconduct by all of those entities in the Flynn case. And you would have a high probability to say that such misconduct existed in my case, yet I was prohibited, even to this day, from raising that as an argument in my defense.
So are you going to file an appeal at this point?
We have already filed the notice of appeal,
okay.
2 different ones. We have appealed my conviction. There are many flaws in the trial. We've also separately appealed the government's, or I should say the judge's decision to vacate my conviction and grant me a new trial based on the egregious misconduct of this juror. There is other additional juror misconduct, which will probably be raised in the proper forum at the right time. But when you get right down to it, anyone who examines this will recognize that they never charged me with any of the crimes that they alleged. The prosecutors went to several federal judges and magistrates claiming that they had probable cause to charge me with that long list of crimes. In the end, they charged me with lying to Congress. Now, the matters that they say I made misstatements about were neither material or relevant or illegal. So I had no reason to lie, had no motive to lie.
Right.
Therefore, I had no intent to lie. In order to violate the False Statements Act, which is what I was charged with, you have to have both intent and it has to be material. The Trump campaign's interest in WikiLeaks is not a crime. In fact, it's a matter of public record.
Right.
Donald Trump discussed it in public forums 142 times in September and October. So what was there to hide? Now, as I've said previously, every one of the government's witnesses lied on the stand. Exculpatory evidence and witnesses appeared before the Mueller grand jury. They were just routinely ignored. There were witnesses who completely refuted what the left-wing nutjob progressive radio host Randy Credico testified to. This was completely refuted before the grand jury. I was accused of witness tampering in that it was alleged that I threatened to steal his dog. Credico threatened to shoot another witness, an exculpatory witness, before my grand jury in the head if he testified contrary to what Credico had told the feds. But he was not charged with witness tampering. This is Kafkaesque. I mean,
it's really
Andrew
tragic.
Weissman special.
It's really tragic.
Hooked beyond all imagination.
What's the deal with Bannon and Bannon's testimony? I mean, that was very surprising to me.
Well, here's what we know. When the House Intelligence Committee declassified Steve Bannon's testimony 2 weeks ago, and you compare it side by side with his sworn testimony at my trial, it is inescapable. It is indisputable that he either lied to the House Intelligence Committee, where he said he never spoke to me about WikiLeaks ever on any occasion, or he lied at my trial where he said we spoke about it regularly and he viewed me as the campaign's access point with WikiLeaks, which, Manny, that would be news to me since we never discussed it. I think I spoke to him a total of 6 times during 2016, and we certainly never discussed WikiLeaks. So the point, of course, is that he perjured himself in either one place or the other. If it was in front of the House Intelligence Committee, well, that's what I'm charged with. So why hasn't he been charged? If he perjured himself at trial, which I believe he did, then he should be held responsible for that. What was his motive? Well, it's hard to say. Did he commit some crime in which he was given a non-prosecution agreement in return for testifying against me? That's a possibility. Or was he jealous of my longtime personal relationship with candidate Trump, who became President Trump, someone for whom I have great loyalty and affection? The point of this whole investigation, Manny, became clear on July 24th, 2019. That's when the Mueller goons offered me a deal. If your client will simply recharacterize the content of some 29 telephone calls between himself and candidate Trump in 2016, all of which lasted longer than 30 minutes, if he will confess, if he will come clean and tell the truth that those calls were about Russia and WikiLeaks, well, we would recommend to the judge no jail time. In other words, they wanted me to lie.
Right.
And I refused to lie, which is why I'm in this predicament. But to me, it was never a question. I have said it. The president said it in his written responses to Robert Mueller. Rick Gates lied about it at my trial. That could actually be proven. I've never discussed WikiLeaks or Russia in any context ever with President or candidate Donald Trump. That was the truth. That is the truth. That continues to be the truth. And I was not willing to lie about it. So that's why I'm facing 40 months in a federal prison. As you know, the 4 prosecutors in my case, who the mainstream media continues to refer to as non-political career line prosecutors, That's a lie. Both of them, all of them were tied to either Clinton or Obama as political appointees in non-prosecutorial jobs. They're political hitmen and women. Recommended a 7 to 9 year sentence based on, quote, Stone's involvement in foreign interference in our elections, close quote, which is not what I was charged with, which is not what I was convicted of. In my sentencing, the judge said, Stone has been convicted of covering up for President Donald Trump. Wrong. There was no such charge and no such evidence. This is a kangaroo court. This is a Soviet-style show trial. It was a total railroading, and anyone who will examine the facts would recognize that.
I can't believe the politicization of the entire judicial process with regard to you and to General Flynn and with regard to the Mueller report, which is really a nothing burger. And we spent, $35 million on what? What do we get out of it? Nothing. And they're still destroying your life. It's just tragic. How much money did you spend on the defense of this?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that in the beginning, of course, I had to spend my own money to defend myself. So therefore, I lost my home, my savings, my insurance, one of the 2 cars that we owned. The one we have now is 15 years old. And more importantly, my ability to make a living, because I made a living by writing and speaking, but I was gagged. And trust me, nobody wants to hire a consultant or a strategist who's under federal indictment. Ultimately, 65,000 great Americans stepped forward, and I raised somewhere around $2 million for my initial defense. I was disappointed, frankly, in my defense team. However, it's like going into a prize fight with your hands tied behind your back. We were not allowed to argue selective prosecution. In other words, Comey, Clapper, Brennan, McCabe, Strzok, Page, Rosenstein, Mueller, they can lie to Congress without consequence about consequential and material matters, but I couldn't argue that I was singled out for political purposes.
And your opponent had brass knuckles, don't forget. Their gloves were loaded.
Right. The underlying premise of my indictment, the Russians hacked the DNC and gave the information to WikiLeaks. I could disprove that with both forensic evidence and expert testimony, but I was prohibited from doing so. As I said earlier, I was specifically prohibited from exposing misconduct of the special counsel, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the certain members of Congress, Adam Schiff. So it's like going into a prize fight with your hands tied behind your back. The judge ruled for the government on every pretrial motion with one exception. Beyond that, this was a bloodbath. And the problem with an appeal is it will take at least a year, and it should cost me at least another $1 million, which I don't have. Meanwhile, at 67 years old, they want to send me to a COVID-infested prison. So Michael Avenatti is out, Michael Cohen is out, even Paul Manafort, who's had 2 heart attacks, is out, but the Bureau of Prisons is determined to incarcerate me just a few weeks from today.
Do you have another legal defense fund if people in my audience want to donate to it?
Absolutely. You can go to stonedefensefund.com, stonedefensefund.com. We are still raising money to finance our appeal. I've hired 2 new attorneys, David Schoen and Seth Ginsburg. I have a high degree of confidence in them. In all honesty, my original team of attorneys, I think were intimidated by the government, and we should have been more combative at trial. There was nothing that Randy Credico said or that Rick Gates said or that Steve Bannon said that could not have been refuted with over 800 individual pieces of evidence that I had prepared, either emails, text message, or videos, but my lawyers declined to do that. It is not outside the realm that I could raise the issue of ineffective counsel in my appeal, but I have not yet decided to do that.
What do you think's going on with with COVID and these lockdowns? It seems like the world is kind of turned on its ear right now, right? The world is just upside down.
Well, first we tried the Russian collusion, that failed. Then we tried the Ukrainian deal, that was a fraud. Then COVID, there's going to be millions of dead people, Manny, millions. Oops, wait a minute, that didn't happen. And now we have George Floyd, which is a tragedy, and nobody defends police brutality. And I think the state of Minnesota should have brought more draconian charges against those cops. But it's being used as an excuse for anarchy. And there is no excuse for breaking the law and looting, rioting, hurting people. This is an anarchistic plan to overturn the government. These things are all being done in protest of the election of Donald Trump because they couldn't beat him. With all those advantages they had, they still couldn't beat him. And he's an amazing individual with enormous courage and great stamina, and he still just keeps moving forward despite all of these phony obstacles being put in his way. These new jobs numbers are really incredible. What it shows is the fundamental policies of Trump to cut taxes and regulation are still working.
They work.
And the country will bounce back under his leadership. You elect Joe Biden, if he lives till Inauguration Day, and you raise taxes and lay on new regulations and increase spending, and then you will have a depression. There's no question about that. So President Trump has the country moving in the right direction. I think most people are now realizing that while COVID is not a total fraud, it was never quite as dangerous as we were being told. And we essentially sabotaged our own economy out of an abundance of caution. I'm not a scientist, either is Donald Trump. We had no way of knowing how this would play out. And I'd rather obviously see fewer sick and dead people than more.
Sure.
But in retrospect, I think perhaps the government overreacted in an abundance of caution.
How do you see Trump's reelection right now? The polls seem to be again skewed against him in terms of what's reported, like they were in 2016.
Well, I take the polls a little more seriously this time because I think some of the underlying defects in the 2016 polling have been corrected, meaning the 2016 polls were mostly based on a model that thought the 2016 electorate would look like the 2012 electorate. In terms of rural versus urban, black, white, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Hispanic, older, younger, and so on. That didn't turn out to be true. The electorate of 2016 was very different than the electorate of 2012, but there was no way for pollsters to know that. I think they have corrected for that error. On the other hand, given the constant tsunami of fake news coverage and the vituperation that the president and his family are subjected to every single day, these poll numbers are not surprising. The president has not been able to be out on the hustings, telling his own story. The censorship on social media, on the internet, is a real serious impediment to re-election.
Absolutely.
The rise of a vibrant alternative media based in the internet was one of the keys to Donald Trump's election in 2016. Which is why the globalists and the tech left are trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Facebook has a new censorship board, a majority of the members of whom have some tie to George Soros. That's not a good thing. So I think the president will win re-election. I think there's going to be a lot of disputes. Mail-in ballots violate the state constitution in at least 12 states. 35 states require a photo ID to vote. You can't do a photo ID through the mail.
Sure.
So I see the results of the election being highly controversial. I don't think anybody's going to be allowed to steal the election, although there will certainly be an effort by the Democrats to do that. On the other hand, let's look at their candidate, Joe Biden. This man is personally responsible for the mass incarceration of more black people than anyone living other than Bill Clinton. He is the father of the 1994 crime bill, which is the bill which required the harsh mandatory penalties for the one-time, nonviolent, first-time possession of small amounts of crime, of drugs. This has been used unfairly and disproportionately to incarcerate millions of black people at this point. It is a giant social and economic failure as a policy. The war on drugs, which was begun by Richard Nixon, was a mistake. I've written this in 2 books, and maybe his greatest mistake. Drug abuse is a public health problem, not a criminal justice problem. I'm not talking about drug dealers. I'm not talking about drug cartels. I'm not talking about drug kingpins. I'm talking about the housewife who gets caught with 1/8 of an ounce of marijuana in her purse and has to support 3 children without a husband.
Sure.
A judge should have discretion in these cases. A judge should be able to decide whether the punishment fits the crime. But thanks to Joe Biden, there are people locked in the bowels of our penal system for these ridiculously long sentences who are not violent criminals. Joe Biden did that to you, folks, and he still defends it. He doesn't even recant. Joe Biden's drug policies have destroyed families, destroyed lives, rehabilitated no one, and cost the taxpayers at this point billions of dollars to incarcerate and feed people who are not violent criminals. Take Donald Trump's policy, on the other hand. The Second Chance Act, which was championed by Jared Kushner as well as Kim Kardashian, is good public policy. People who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes for these ridiculously long sentences should have a second chance, should have a chance at rehabilitation. And thanks to President Trump, now they do. Biden, Trump, there's a comparison I want to have.
Do you think if you're not successful in your appeal that Trump would pardon you?
I haven't speculated about it. Obviously, he could also commute my sentence, which would allow my appeals to go forward. And therefore, at 67 years old, I would avoid what I think is virtually a certain death sentence of being sent to a federal prison, given my health and my age.
Absolutely.
I've been very forthright about the fact that I am praying fervently to God for intervention. The president has several options. But here's what I do know. Nobody tells Donald Trump what to do. He is the only man elected to the presidency in my lifetime who is not beholden to anybody, no special interest, not Wall Street, not the banks, not the insurance companies, not the oil companies, not the defense contractors. He answers only to the American people and his own conscience. This is what makes him a great president. This is what made him a great candidate. And therefore, he will do what he's going to do based on his own judgment. I know him to be a tremendously fair person. I think he is rightfully outraged at the government's conduct in their efforts to take him out. And I think he clearly understands the people who sought to destroy General Flynn and the people who are seeking to destroy me are the exact same people who sought to destroy the president.
Sure.
This is the greatest political scandal in history. Seeing all these Democrats say it's no big deal, these are the same people who are flipping out about Watergate. Oh, it's the gravest constitutional crisis of our time. No, in this case, Barack Obama used the full authority of the United States government and the capability of our intelligence agencies to illegally defraud the courts in order to spy on the Republican candidate for president, the president-elect, and the president of the United States. That is the definition of sedition. That is treasonous, it is illegal, and somebody has to be punished for it. And for the Democrats to say there's no crime here, that's laughable. Jerry Nadler's worried about the rule of law because Attorney General Barr wants to dismiss the completely fraudulent case against General Flynn. If you're worried about the rule of law, let's look at the way Barry and his pals tried to hijack an American election. I mean, there's plenty to go around here. Brennan, Clapper, Comey, Rice, Powers, these people engaged in an illegal attempt to take down the president of the United States. If we don't have a two-tier justice system, when are they being prosecuted? I'm tired of being told to be patient. This isn't rocket science. It's been 3.5 years. Are we going to see justice, or is it just General Flynn and Roger Stone who have to face consequences when, in fact, we haven't actually committed any crime whatsoever?
Have you, we're going to wrap up in a sec, but before we go, I wanted to ask you if you had a chance to watch Tiger King, Joe Exotic on Netflix. Have you had a chance to watch any of that?
I have not, because I am really rushing to finish a book about this entire experience so that I can finally tell my side of the story. I spend the rest of my time working on fundraising so that I can finance an appeal. I do want to specifically deny that that guy and I get our hair done at the same place. That is categorically untrue. I think Frank
I
Milano
figured you
put
would
that
like his
quote there.
fashion. You would like some of his fashion sense. I know you're a very fashionable guy, so
Yeah, I'm not big on the gold chains, but they're big in Staten Island, from what I understand.
absolutely. Well, Roger, I really appreciate you taking the time. And to my audience, please support Roger however you can. And it's what is it? What is your defense fund again?
So you can help in three ways. You can help my legal defense fund by going to stonedefensefund.com. You can help my family put groceries on the table and pay our rent and my wife's medical expenses by going to stonefamilyfund.com. And if you want to just sign a petition to the president urging him to take action in my case, either a pardon or a commutation, you can go to freerogerstone.com. Thank you and God bless you. 65,000 Americans have stepped up. I could never have gotten this far. Perhaps a lesser man would have taken the deal that Robert Mueller offered, but I said no, and I have no regrets whatsoever about it.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks to my audience. I hope you really appreciate Roger taking the time. This is an important cause. I hope that you get behind him and support him. This is Manny Alicandro, another episode of Manny's Take. Thank you.